looks at what may at one time have been called non-traditional ways of raising money to support our news operations, which would include philanthropy, membership models, audience engagement, and other such things. Today, these are not so non-traditional and can be found at the foundation of many small nonprofit and for-profit news organizations. Leading our discussion is Shay Totten, Newsroom Success Manager for the American Press Institute. He is joined by panelists Eric Ligeti, Director of Audience for the Narwhal, a nonprofit online publication in Victoria, British Columbia, Christian Mader, founder and editor of The Current of Lafayette, Louisiana, and Carolina Guerrero, co-founder of Radio Ambulante Studios, based in New York. Shay works with newsrooms that utilize API's proprietary analytics tool, Metrics for News, which is built to help publishers answer important audience questions, identify better ways to engage users, improve loyalty, and drive subscriptions. Shay joined API in 2022 after leading the growth and membership strategy at the Compass experiment, which was a collaboration between the Google News Initiative and McClatchy. Compass launched digital newsrooms in underserved communities, and he previously worked as a consultant for the News Revenue Hub, Lion Publishers, and Inside Climate News. And he specializes in audience engagement and membership best practices, as well as strategic communications. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shay to introduce more fully the rest of our panel, and I will gladly do that.
Thank you so much, Jerry. As Jerry mentioned, I'm Shay Totten. I'm with the American Press Institute. And we're going to go and have everyone sort of give a little bit more little biographical detail on themselves. Then we're going to go into some slides. Then I'm going to lead a little conversation up here. Then we're going to open it up to you. But just for a little background for myself, beyond what Terry read, I got my start in journalism at my community weekly newspaper in northern Vermont. And back then we were filing our news stories on manual typewriters. And when I finally exited sort of daily journalism in 2011, I was filing some stories on this. Well, not this, because this is like a newer version of this. But what was this at the time was an iPhone. And live tweeting and like live recording and live streaming stuff, which was astronomical. And so when I look out and I see younger journalists today, I'm just like amazed. Like I can't imagine what it's going to be like when you're in my seat, in however many years it's been, because it's been too many to count, what it's going to be like for you. But the bottom line is, though, I think, and what for me is after journalism, I really wanted to get into this idea of working with on how to build more community and do community engagement and membership models, both for journalism but also for community organizations, which newspapers are community organizations, which I think we forget sometimes. And so I'm really excited by some of the conversations that the four of us have had over Zoom over the past couple of months, because I feel like they're going to articulate some of the things that I hope that some of you can take back to your newsrooms if you're not doing it already, or give you a way to maybe kind of like refine something you're already trying. So one of the things I will say is that my time at the Compass experiment, although short-lived, because unfortunately when they came out of bankruptcy and the hedge fund owners took control, they decided that free money from Google wasn't something they wanted, so they shut down our project, which was unfortunate. But one of the things we were able to do before we left was to really focus on something that we're seeing more and more of, which was to build better relationships with local community foundations. So while the industry is thankful for foundations like Knight, which has a large S, and certainly the most recent announcement of $500 million, and then moving on to even maybe more money to go into local journalism is welcome. In some cases, a lot of times, smaller newspapers don't even have access to the kind of pipeline that's going to take. And so building sort of relationships with local funders and even local community foundations who are more increasingly seeing the importance of newspapers as core fabrics to their sort of civic life, as it was exampled by this slideshow that we just saw from Kansas, which I think is phenomenal. So what I'm hoping is that from this session you'll sort of be thinking more about those kind of relationships, but those relationships also exist with your existing readers, and trying to sort of how do you cultivate that kind of sense of community and put yourself back in that space again of being that kind of conduit for the discussions that are really important for your community. So things like Radically Rural, I mean, that a newspaper is co-hosting. I mean, these are things that I think, even stepping back and looking at that, like these are conversations that we can be fostering in our own communities that we have sort of, for years, in many cases, especially for engagement, we sort of just left it to like social media platforms to do, and we've seen where that's gotten us. And so now it's like time to like, how do we reclaim the space that we sort of ceded to other organizations, and what do we do, and how do we make that space happen? So thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation, looking forward to your questions. And I'm just gonna pass it over to everyone, and then we'll go back and do slides. So Eric, why don't you go ahead and start and tell us a little bit more about you and yourself, and then we'll go to Carolina and then Christian.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jay. All right. I work as the Director of Audience at The Narwhal, which, as Terry mentioned, it's a publication that's based up in Canada. It was founded in Victoria in 2018. I myself am based in Vancouver, BC, but we have a team of 23 staff in different parts of the country, including BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. And The Narwhal is an online magazine that's specifically dedicated to covering issues around the environment across the country. We're independent, we're a nonprofit, and we don't run advertising, we don't have a paywall, and our single largest source of revenue is our members. And so by members, I mean anybody who gives us a recurring donation, monthly or annual. We also have some one-time donors, and the rest of our funding is made up of different kinds of foundational support. Our mandate is to cover in-depth, investigative explainers. We like to go by a bit of a mantra called complicating the narrative, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Amanda Ripley around that, but it's really about making sure that we're not trying to simplify the issues that we cover. We're trying to explain the nuance around them and really trying to help our readers understand issues that overlap industry and environment and Indigenous communities and other sorts of communities that have traditionally been underrepresented or might not necessarily see those different viewpoints presented in reporting that they normally come across. We're also a registered journalism organization, which in the States is maybe not too unique. As a nonprofit, we can accept charitable donations and we can issue tax receipts. But in Canada a few years ago, that was it's a pretty novel concept. And so slowly, some organizations are also becoming those registered journalism organizations and able to take that step, which is really big, not just for individual readers and donors, but for bigger foundations that maybe wouldn't have given in the past without that special tax status. So today, I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about some tips around how we approach audience revenue. A little bit of background. We don't have any special perks when you become a member besides occasional offers of swag. I know there's some questions around swag in the previous session. A lot of people say that the reason that they give isn't because of swag, to be clear. It's because they feel like they're part of a community. They want to be part of something that's making a difference. These might be people that have traditionally never given to journalism before. Maybe their avenue in the past was to a local conservation organization, or maybe they have given to newspapers or other kinds of subscriptions. But the primary reason for giving generally is because they see the work that we're doing and they decide they want to take the step of making a donation. We do offer some pretty sweet swag. Unfortunately, I don't have any here, but we have tote bags, we have toques or beanies, and I'll get into a little bit of that as I walk through. I thought I'd kind of start around an example, our most recent fundraising appeal that we did, and I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the steps that we took in this most recent appeal. So this is the story that kind of prompted us to do it. It all kind of went down really rapidly. Last Thursday is when the news broke that the Premier of Ontario, so maybe say a governor of a state here, he 11 months ago, it's felt like many years now, decided that he was going to take away about 7,000 acres of land from a protected area and basically hand it over to developers to build housing. As many communities are kind of dealing with housing crises right now, and the Premier's justification was we need this land in order to build it. Many experts countered that there is in fact plenty of other land that could be used to build housing, and it doesn't have to be this protected area that includes wetlands and other sensitive ecosystems and farmland that's essential to a certain part of the province. Our reporting team in Ontario kind of led the file on a lot of this reporting, including some collaborative investigations with a local daily paper in Toronto that revealed that developers who ended up benefiting the most from these changes happened to have acquired this land in the months leading up to the Premier's decision that the land was going to be removed, suddenly making the real estate they bought much more valuable. And so we had continued to publish a series of stories surrounding this and other related issues around cuts to environmental protections over the past 11 months. And then just about a month ago, there's been a couple of watchdog reports that came out that confirmed a lot of our reporting and also built on it. And in the preceding weeks, a few ministers ended up resigning. And then last Thursday, it culminated in the Premier walking back the decision and returning the land to the protected area. I was on another call at the time when the news broke, and we were like, oh, it's actually newsletter day. We send out a weekly newsletter on Thursdays. We're gonna have to pivot because we're gonna have to send out a fundraising appeal right now. There aren't too many other examples of having greater impact than your reporting leading to a policy reversal. So the story came out pretty quickly. Those are our two reporters in Ontario, Emma and Fatima. And we decided that we were going to do a couple things which we often do with an appeal. One is we would have a pop-up on our site. And so this is something that would appear anytime you land on a story specifically about the Greenbelt, and kind of getting right at the heart of the issue and not being afraid. I think sometimes as journalists, we're a little bit afraid to toot our own horn too much, but this was definitely an example where we didn't want to be too modest. We wanted to make it clear and articulate the impact that our reporting, which was able to happen because of the contributions of all of our members who support the hiring of all our journalists in order to accomplish this kind of thing. So, a couple of lessons on how we approach fundraising. Ask, ask, ask. You can always probably be asking more. If you're hearing from people that, if you hear from a reader or an email here or there, hey, this is annoying, why am I getting these pop-ups? It's probably one of only a very few select number of people. And if they're that upset about a request for a donation on a site that doesn't even have a paywall, mind you, then maybe they weren't ready to give to begin with. And it's okay if one or two people are a little turned off. The number one thing we find with successful appeals is that they're able to connect to people's emotions and connect it back to readers. So this is like an excerpt of one section of the email that we sent. And you can see there in that bolded hyperlinked line, we're saying we're only able to do this kind of reporting because of the support of people like you. 5,711, that was the number of members we had at the time of sending that email out. It's happening because of people like you who give what they can. The second piece that we find is really important to a successful ask is creating a sense of urgency and being very specific about what we're asking for. So in this case, we were working towards a membership target of 5,800 by the end of the month. Now, sometimes you might not necessarily have a specific thing that you already have in mind in terms of your membership target. In that case, it's okay to come up with a new number when you're in the thick of things and thinking about what would be a realistic and achievable goal that people could potentially rally behind in order in order to help generate that kind of momentum. We're articulating the ask. We're saying we would like to reach 5,800 people, and we're saying, will you be one of 89 people to sign up so that we can keep holding power accountable? And so we're kind of trying to articulate an ask and tell them that the ask has to happen. We're trying to raise this within the next week or so because we have an end of month target, and we want you to be part of that group of people who help step up. Another thing we find is important is when you see an appeal that's doing well, double down and keep on asking. So within the first 24-ish hours of the appeal going out, we had signed up 150 new members. And that was across our email and as well as our broader pop-ups and other calls to action on our website or on social media. So when we are doubling down on an ask, oftentimes it doesn't really mean changing the language all that much. It's just kind of helping to introduce extra momentum. So whenever somebody signs up, they can put in a little line that says, why am I contributing to make a donation? And so this was just some of the feedback that we got. And so we led our follow-up email on the we sent the first one out on the Thursday, we sent the follow-up on the Saturday morning, and we led with these quotes from donors. So kind of bringing it back to connecting it back to readers, like immediately like circling back and saying, this is the feedback that we got from some of our newest members. And, will you join in and help be part of that number of people? And as you can see here, we're already saying we're blown away by the number of people that stepped up and joined. So people kind of already, maybe who saw the first email, recognize like, we've already surpassed our target, but doesn't mean we can't keep pushing, right? And right now this is in the form of a follow-up ask, but other work we do, and we'll probably touch on it in our discussion, is this can also take shape in the form of appeals that we do on a recurring annual basis, like we do a special promo around Black Friday that's successful, and so we just tend to continue doing that promotion every single year. Another thing we do that we think is important is not just talking to the people that we want to bring on board, but the people that have already voiced their support. And so any sort of fundraising email that we send can easily be turned into a thank you or an appreciation note to our existing donors or members. So right here you can see an example where the language there leading in is pretty similar to the language that was in the email for our member appeal, and then we kind of just pivot by saying they're only able to do this kind of work because of your support, and land is now protected in this Greenbelt area because of members like you. And we're increasingly thinking about what more we can do to make sure that not just from an acquisition but from a retention standpoint, there's definitely an issue around how do you limit the churn of people whose credit card might have dropped off or who might stop giving every so often, and making sure that you're showing them as much love as possible. I really appreciated the handwritten notes that I got when we all came with our speaker notes when we came here for Radically Rural, and we actually do something similar anytime somebody signs up as a member. They get in the mail a handwritten thank you note, courtesy of our #1 volunteer, which is our founder's mom, who writes all the thank you notes under her daughter's name. So finding ways to add that personal touch can definitely go a long way. And I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Carolina, do you want to?
Yeah, should I go?
Yeah, I'll get you up. Yeah, we have to.
Do you want to go back to your profile?
Oh, yes, I guess so. Thank you. I need this now. Hi, my name is Carolina Guerrero. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Radio Ambulante Studios. We are a podcast production company based in New York. We cover Latin America and the Latino communities in the US. We created, I'm gonna go to the next slide because I think I'm gonna tell you how it all started. Yeah, this is me. We created Radio Ambulante in 2011. We started working in 2011 and launched the first episode of the first podcast, Radio Ambulante, in 2012. My co-founder is my husband now. I don't have a great story as Lindsay's. I mean, it's a nice story, but yeah. So he's a novelist and a journalist. And years back, he published a novel about radio and was hired by the BBC to produce an audio documentary about music in Peru, his native country. And he traveled with a BBC producer, performed a lot of interviews, and a month later, when he received the link, the copy of the documentary, he realized that most of the voices that he felt were more compelling, were left out because they were in Spanish. And the producers obviously privatized the voices in English. So he was left with this question: how will a space in the airwaves sound like if we tell stories in Spanish? No? And years later, we decided to create that space together. So we launched two podcasts. The first one here, Radio Ambulante, was launched in 2012. We tell stories in Spanish from all over Latin America and the US. Our elevator pitch at the time is like This American Life, only than Spanish and regional. And we produce 30 episodes per year. Each season starts in September and ends in May. We are distributed by NPR since 2016. And at the moment, we reach 900,000 downloads monthly. Most of the content is kind of like evergreen. When we created Radio Ambulante, we wanted to hear, like, we were trying to fill a void. We were living in the United States. My husband, my co-founder, grew up in Alabama. I grew up in Colombia and came here 23 years ago. And I think even though our backstories were different, we couldn't find content from Latin America in Spanish that could be feel like narrated the human experience. So we wanted to, a bit as Arik just said, we wanted to complicate the story of the concept of Latin America and Latinos, meaning that we wanted to break stereotypes and make sure that people who lived the stories were not just like anonymous numbers. No? So we wanted to bring those voices, people who lived the stories and passed through situations, telling their own stories. And it has been very successful. We have audience in the United States, like 40%, and 40% in Latin America. This is today. And the rest is around the world. So we have a lot of Latin Americans and Latinos listening to us. 3 years ago, we launched El Hilo, which is more like an explainer. Every Friday, El Hilo talks about one story, the most important news story in Latin America or about Latinos. And we produce 50 episodes per year. We're reaching 300,000 downloads right now. Together, we have reached 55 million historic downloads. Our catalog includes 400 episodes, and we are heard from 126 countries. We started stronger in the United States, and suddenly the podcast in the last decade has grown so much that we have like really a global community. One thing that is important to us is that some people ask, why do you cover Latin America if you are in the US? We are based in New York. And the thing is this, that local news are not just so local anymore. So if there is a story at the border about immigration or migration, it's not just a story at the border. It can be a story that started because of climate change in Guatemala, or it can started because of the narco in Colombia, or it can be about homophobic, or freedom of expression in Haiti. So we think that we need to add context and depth and in depth, and that's not so common to be found. So our community appreciates that very much. We have made deliberate efforts to build a strong community. and to grow it, nurture it, and make sure that it's strong. I squeezed this slide a bit. So we would do live events. For example, that one on the top, that was on the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, sold out live events for 10 years. These are live shows where we tell the stories live and join the community. During the pandemic, people were so isolated, so we were launching this podcast on Zoom with DJs, and we had like 1,000 people on the podcast, on the Zoom dancing with the cats, the partners, the cactus. It was amazing. That's that photo. That is a very bad photo, but I want to put the focus on this program that is called this product called the Listening Clubs, Clubes de Escucha, we call it. Before, like in 2018, we started piloting this project, trying to learn more about the conversations that the content that we created sparked. And we launched the listening clubs that are in-person events where people, up to 20 people, get together to listen to an episode and talk. So we piloted the project in 15 cities in the US and Latin America. It was successful, and then we created this toolkit for listeners to organize themselves. So you can see the map in the bottom. We had like 70 listening clubs happening around the globe. We just launched our new season with like simultaneous clubs. During the pandemic, so many of these clubs became online listening clubs, and now they're coming back. So we have listening clubs in different cities. It can be like just some people go to a cafe and rent the place, or they just like go and cook together at home, you know, but they just talk about things. And this has been very appreciated by the community, because at the end, when you listen to something or you learn about the news that is so important, you feel the need to talk to someone. And this has created a lot of like a sense of belonging. This is about revenue generated by audience. So I want to tell you that we created these listening clubs not thinking about revenue so much. It was more thinking about making sure that this content that we created could just like have us, that we could see the impact of it. But at some point, the engagement editor that we had insisted on launching that we should launch a membership program. Is this one? It's called the Ambulantes. I have many doubts to launch it because we were just such a small team of 12 people. I didn't know how to, I was afraid of not being able to respond to the listeners. And I was also afraid of asking for money. And then, so we launched a survey. Every year we launch audience surveys, and we ask the community, we said, hey, would you be able to support us with $5 per month? And 6,500 people replied to the survey, and 60% of them say yes, absolutely. So with that information, knowing a bit, we launched a membership program. And I squeeze all these colors here because I just want to make sure that I want to transfer this to you. For Radio Ambulante, the community is a vibrant community. It's a young community. The average listener is 33. We have the youngest listener average, like the youngest listener at NPR, and that's and the most diverse actually. So we double the industry and NPR's average listener, of African Americans. And also Latinos. 67% of our listeners are Latinos and Black listeners. So we make sure that people understand that this is vibrant, diverse, that we respond to their curiosity, and that this creates this celebration of what we do. The membership program today brings 20% of the annual budget from around 5,000 members. And we host 3 big campaigns per year. But we are we make calls all year long, but it's really just 3 strong campaigns. And I can talk about that later. And we also have this other product that I want to show you that is called Jiveboard en Español. It used to be called Lupa. So when we started surveying the audience, early in the project, and we realized that there was a small percentage, but very constant and growing constantly, that it was of people who were not Latinos and they were not native Spanish speakers. So we tried to find out more, and we learned that we had like many Spanish learners in as listeners. So we partnered with a technology company and launched this app for Spanish learners. Basically, we transform our content, our episodes in smart lessons. It's very effective, and then we charge for the app. We have around 8,000 users of the app, and it brings 10% of the annual budget. And our users of this app are independent students, high schools, universities, some institutions where their employees are bilingual and they need to learn or improve their Spanish. And I think with this, we learned that that sometimes the opportunity comes from not necessarily from your direct audience, but also like the target that you have, but also other things that are unique. What we wanted to make sure is that we could break the language barrier, and also we could make sure that nobody felt alienated in the community. So this is very successful to us. And I think that's what I got. Thank you.
Hi. So I'm Christian Mader. I'm the editor and founder of The Current. My presentation here is a little light on biographical information, so I'll just kind of try and spitball it for you. So The Current is a local news operation. We mostly cover local government and those kinds of things in Lafayette, Louisiana, which if you aren't really generally familiar with the geography of Louisiana, we're kind of pretty far south, west of New Orleans, about 100 miles on I-10. So we're in the part of the state that if you think of Louisiana, you're probably thinking about around where I live, right? So Francophone originally, Cajun, Zydeco dancing, that kind of thing. That's where I live. All right. So the Current, I have kind of I think a story you've probably heard before in terms of being a founder of a news publication. I lost my job in news. I worked for an alt weekly called The Independent, which actually hadn't been publishing for all that long, but the owners of that publication had been publishing alt weeklies for about 40 or 50 years. And as kind of had this epiphany today that a lot of the things that they were doing before I did my job were things that I'm learning now or things that publishers are starting to do. So I kind of feel like I'm just reinventing the wheel that they invented, but they had their reasons for shutting down. And I suppose I lost my job, but that was an opportunity, right? So I raised a little bit of seed money with their help. And in 2018, we started The Current, which was a new digital publication for our community, which is about 120,000 people in the city of Lafayette, 240,000 in the parish. Parishes is what we call counties. And about 500,000 if you call the sort of major metro area. We're generally pretty hyper local, right? So I think, in terms of the context of this conversation, I mean, we're not rural, but I think a lot of what we deal with are issues that I imagine many publishers in rural communities face. And we look a lot like you guys in terms of how we approach this and what we're trying to do. Our journalism is primarily in-depth and enterprising, so we're not generally where you go to find out what happened that day. You're generally coming to us to, one, find out why the thing that happened that day really matters, how it fits into sort of bigger picture, or we do a lot of investigative work that sort of drives the news cycle. So we have relationships with the daily publications in our area and local TV stations. They run our content. In fact, I had to step out of Jeremiah's thing earlier because I'm going to be on the TV to talk about why Lafayette's experiencing a housing affordability crisis, right? So we try to position ourselves as experts on Lafayette, right? And so we do that as best we can. We're a small team. I started basically with myself and my former editor and a couple of laptops. And in the last fiscal year, we've managed to put ourselves in a position where we actually have staff. So I'm one of 5 employees. The cool thing about starting a news publication is you get to give yourself a title. So I'm the executive editor, whatever that actually means. I didn't really come from legacy media. Having worked at that alt weekly, I actually was there kind of at the tail end of it. And I ran far away from journalism after I got my journalism degree in 2006. And so I kind of went back to it and I sort of skipped some steps, right, to becoming a founder. And so all that to say, we've spent a lot of time, pardon my French, just throwing shit at a wall. And in fact, I thought the first thing that I would show you were like, this is just a list of things that we tried that didn't work. And I can happily go through each one of them if you really want to, but I just kind of wanted to throw out the message that like, I've been to a lot of these kind of think tank type summits and conferences where a Lion member and INN member, and I feel like a lot of times I sit in this room and I'm told about a lot of great things that people are doing that they're working, and I'm like, hey, I try a lot of shit and it doesn't work. Well, I just want you to know we are all trying shit that doesn't work, and so that's kind of what's up there. Although, maybe I'll kind of, pull it out of the junk heap and try again later. One thing that did work for us is we actually started with a membership program. What is membership? I don't think anybody actually knows that question. I mean, we were a member, part of the membership puzzle project, and they kind of had a definition for that. We operate kind of more or less in the public radio style membership, which basically means you gave us money, so we're going to call you a member. In other worlds, I mean, they may call it a donor, right? I remember talking to a CPA. If you work in nonprofit news, right, one of the most frustrating things is no one understands tax law around nonprofit media. And so I said, oh, well, we have member support. And he said, don't call them members. Well, why not? And he said, well, because that means they have to get something from you. And that doesn't work for tax deductions. And I was like, this is bizarre. Do you not listen to NPR? Like, that's what they call everybody who does it. So when I say we had a membership program, we asked people for money. Like, we started before we even had a publication, before we delivered anything. We created what we called, that's actually the first thing that failed in that corner there, is this little app. We called it the Current Plus. And you could sign up for $7.50 a month. And it would be like your ticket to getting discounts at various businesses. And you know what? Nobody wanted it. But they did want to give us money, which we were happy to take. And so from the very beginning, we asked people for dollars, right? And as weird as it was, not offering some sort of very transactional service, people were eager to give it because they wanted to see news in their town, particularly the kind of news that had been lost when my former employers decided to retire. So, I think a big message, whatever you're doing in terms of trying to raise revenue around news, is, probably here if you've ever worked in nonprofit space, right? Kind of the number one advice that they give you in terms of donor management or solicitations and stuff is you don't get what you don't ask for, right? You go into the room and you kind of like that piece of your brain that says like, I can't ask for $10,000. And you're just like, well, you're not going to get $10,000 if you don't ask for it. And it's super weird, right? To, even do that, whatever the scale is, whether you're interrupting somebody's day to say, can I have $10, please? Or you schedule a meeting with a rich person in your town and you're like, can I have $25,000, right? The point is, the only way you get to the yes, right, is you ask for it. And a best practice in membership or donor-based news revenue is you just ask for it all the time, right? I mean, like, it can seem exhausting, and I think Eric had the right insight. Like, if they're mad about it, that's not somebody who's going to give you money, and so you can tell them to write off, right? I mean, it's fine, really. A little bit about how our revenue mix works. I mean, I've kind of here to talk mostly about membership, but that's only a piece of what we do. This is, by the way, on this was our 2022 budget. So we've been growing pretty fast over the last couple of years. So this was a $250,000 operating budget. And we started the Current with about $25,000. So in 4 or 5 years, we grew that 10x. Where's that investment, right? Thank you. So about a third of that comes from membership, 30% around for major gifts. For us, you hear different people define that different ways. For us, anybody, if you give us $1,000 or more, that's a major gift. Some organizations set that at maybe $5,000 or more. Sponsorship/events. So for us, most of our sponsorship dollars are related to events. We do a couple events each year, and we activate most of our sponsorships around that. We've had a couple of instances where we've had underwriters around specific verticals, I guess you'd call them, right? We get some grants. A lot of that is actually Newsmatch. If you guys are nonprofit folks, and if anybody from Knight is in the room, thank you for Newsmatch. It's a wonderful program, and it's been very instrumental in us developing a membership program. And then some advertising. We do about 7% our average revenue last year, although we're trying to grow that. As a nonprofit, we do continue to do advertising. We try to avoid it if we can because we still pay taxes on that. Kind of the way that breaks down, I mean, for us, our number one driver of membership revenue is newsletters. I've heard people talk about email newsletters. We kind of, our first editorial product is still our flagship product. It's a newsletter called The Wire. It comes out every Wednesday. We used to call it The Weekly Wire. Then COVID happened and we did it 5 days a week. And so we just said, okay, well, it can't be The Weekly Wire anymore. It needs to be The Wire. And the name stuck. Although, to my frustration, most people just say that's The Current. And so they'll be like, I read that in The Current the other day. And I'm like, no, you read that in The Wire. So this is just our email subscription list right now. And we were actually pretty bad at audience development for several years. So about 2,000 of that list are subscribers we probably signed up in the last 18 months. We were just not, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to audience development stuff. So we're getting there. And then this is kind of a wonky chart and it gives you a sense of how that kind of compares to our paying people. Like, so the big tall line is people who get our email newsletter and they're not, they're freeloaders, the people that are just getting the free stuff. Then total memberships, right now we have roughly 800 to 850 people that have given us money. So for our definition, whether one-time, annual, monthly, we're just calling you a member, right? Because a lot of one-time folks, frustratingly, give you money more than once a year, but they just don't want to sign up for that annual membership. They're kind of recurring one-time donors, if you like that contradiction in terms. We have roughly 300 monthly members that generates about $45,000 to $5,000 a month for us, so $60,000 a year, which is great. A very small number of yearly, it's really like 50, 60 people that sign up for that. And I swear that they've been there for 5 years and they're just hanging on for dear life, and that's fine. And then one-time donors, right? Folks who give us anywhere from $10 to $500 in a given year. And a lot of them come back. And that's why we still sort of call them members. I see that as part of our donor cultivation strategy. It's like, it feels weird to me to be like, sorry, you didn't give us money this year, so you don't get to be a member anymore. That just doesn't sit right with me. And so we don't really take that approach. So how we raise that money, I'm going to piggyback a little bit on basically what Eric's done, which is, challenging folks, particularly in journalism, which is really hard to do, is to brag on yourself. People back winners. They want to see that you have impact, and they're going to give you money because they believe in what you do, and they see the value of what you do in your community, right? And this was a hard lesson learned for us. I think we struggled a good bit with understanding how to clearly communicate that value proposition to people in terms that connected with their everyday lives or something that we actually did. And the reason for that is if you're a journalist, right, you're even skeptical of your own impact. Did I really change that? Is that fair to say? Like, if that's happening in your head, you're probably an editor or reporter, right? So that's a challenging thing to do. And I should say that one of the things that gives me a lot of heartburn, frankly, is our conversations often with our members and the folks that we want to give us money for the small dollar level versus folks that I might be in a room with trying to solicit major donations. Their value propositions are quite different, and they're often at odds with each other, right? Especially in a local community. Because if you were to drop into Lafayette right now, we have a local election, and you say, hey, I met that guy from The Current. What are they about? And they'd be like, man, that guy hates the mayor, right? I don't hate the mayor. I'm sure you know that that's just the nature of accountability journalism. But I was really struck, right, that one of the speakers at the event this morning was the chair of the county commission, which would just be unthinkable where I live, right? That just wouldn't work. But it doesn't mean you can't ask for money, right? And use that productive adversarial relationship with your local government to do something. These are just two examples of appeals that we've done that worked quite well. So the one on the left is our lead investigative reporter, the most notorious person on our staff, Leslie Turk there. And we did this during Newsmatch last year, right? And consistently, best reporter, best fundraiser. Of course, Leslie doesn't know that she's a fundraiser. I write these emails and then I get her to sign off on it. And so in the one on the left there, she's talking about some, stellar investigation we'd done that year around the mayor, right? And, reminding people of that in very specific terms, right? And I tried to pull a chart out, but it didn't actually pop the way I think it would meet. But this was easily that during that campaign, which we did for 2 months, the most gainful appeal that we did. By a long shot in terms of the number of donations and the dollar amount, right? That one email that Leslie wrote earned us $2,000, right? And for us, it's a huge investment. And a lot of that's recurring revenue, right? It's like people who signed up and say, oh shit, yeah, The Current's cool. I will give them $10 a month, right? So that was a powerful thing. The most successful one that we do 2 campaigns each year, default. So we'll do one in the spring, one at the end of the year, kind of standard operating nonprofit fundraising, and occasionally do flash campaigns. This is something that does work, although I don't recommend it, is you sue the government. People get real excited about that. So we got in a very public fight with our local government over accessibility to public records, and so we sued the crap out of them. There's a whole story about how that winded out, but people love a good fight. I mean, people like to feel like they're a part of what you're doing. In other words, this is lightning in a bottle, I know. I'm not saying like look for opportunities for litigation. That can be very scary and very expensive. But people do want to feel like they're a part of what you do. And that's sort of the lesson that we learned there. And about that $7,000 fundraise, 120 donations we did in about 3 days. And really that was just one appeal, and just saying, everybody, you've been following this, well, we're taking action. We need your help. We're going to sue LCG to stop what we called the paywall, which they were charging $1 per page for digital access to public records, which is just outrageous. So we went for it. We said, all right, cool. All right, we're going to help you guys help us pick a fight. And it raised money very, very quickly. And now it's something we don't necessarily, I can't plan for that, right? I can't say like, well, we're going to need some kind of combative appeal by mid-spring or we're screwed. But I think the lesson I learned there was like there are always opportunities to ask, right? This was right around the corner from Newsmatch again. And in fact, I remember thinking to myself, like, man, should we even do this? I mean, are we going to cannibalize our end of year campaign? And the answer was no. And in fact, the message on the left there is from the same year. Like we had our most successful Newsmatch campaign to date about 2 months later. So it didn't. And I think that the real piece of there is just to say, like I said earlier, you don't get what you don't ask for, right? Like every time that we do it, yeah, you get some grousing. There was a guy who's a big supporter who came into my office a couple of weeks ago, and he just said, hey man, can you just stop sending me the emails? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, do you want anything? No, I want the free stuff. I just don't need all the thank yous. I don't need all the, membership receipt reminders. I'm just trying to get off the grid, dude. Can I like just write you one check? And I was like, sure. So to be clear, you don't want to cancel your subscription. He's like, I just don't want to use a credit card anymore, and your machine is really annoying. And so he wrote me the check anyway. But that's rare, right? Like a person who is actually annoyed by you asking for money. And this is, a guy was giving us $50 a month roughly. So, I know that can feel scary, but I'm telling you, I've gone through it. I've thrown all of that stuff at the wall. And one thing that always works every single time is asking. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple, you raised a couple of things I want to circle back to, but the last thing you just landed on, because each of you kind of talked about that a little bit, which is just, and this is something that I learned very early on in membership development, which is also like you never know if your readers are going to support you unless you ask them. And so I just want to know for each of you, like, what was the tipping point for you that made you say, I can make that ask? Was it a reader survey? Was it like a conversation with a reader? Or was it just, what did you have to do to kind of get over that? Because that is sometimes the biggest hurdle that we have to get over. It's just that, how do we get past that first initial? So Carolina, I'll start with you.
Yeah. I confirmed with that survey that people will donate. I think it was more like the confirmation of our audience editor confirming that, like proving to me. It took us a while to create the backend for the memberships. We received donations before via PayPal, but there were like 60 people donating every month, and we were asking here and there, but nothing like a strategy and a program. And once we put together the backend program, like meaning integrated the MailChimp that we use to send newsletters towards the Salesforce and learning how to use it, and the Stripe, which is the platform that receives the payments, and all that, we received advice at the new Revenue Hub where you work at. That helped us to, just having that, created that was like kind of scary for me just because we were two little people. So once we understood what it required, we just did it. So it was kind of like the capacity, the fear of the capacity that it required.
Right, gotcha, good. How about you, Eric? What about your team?
So I joined the Narwhal about 2 years into its existence, and it had already started to build up a membership program, and they were at about 1,000 members at the time that I joined in early 2020, and the primary way of getting any of that money up until that point was over email. And when I joined, we were we started to participate in this Facebook membership accelerator, and I was brought on as an audience engagement editor, and it was the first time we kind of had a little bit of that capacity to start doing more things and learning about like the low-hanging fruit that was out there, all these people that were coming to our website, and we just weren't really asking them. And so once we started to implement these like slide-ins at the top or like end of article asks like you see like a lot of news sites, especially like The Guardian, I think is one of the originators of it. Once we started to add those things, we started to notice we were now getting this constant trickle anytime people were reading our stories. And so anytime, especially if a story popped off, we would see the correlation between people coming in and finding our work and then signing up and donating, and kind of broke some of our assumptions of thinking that people would, people sign up for our newsletter and then get it for a while and then make the decision to donate. We noticed people were kind of skipping right ahead and finding us for the first time, reading a story, and immediately making a donation. And so I think, seeing that support roll in kind of got rid of any sort of concerns we had about asking too much, and just made us realize we just had to try, and like Christian echoed and Carolina too, just ask.
And I'm glad Christian included that slide of the things that didn't work, because I find that one of the biggest lessons I ever learned was when I did my own sort of digital daily print, weekly print hybrid startup back in the early 2000s, and it lasted for about 3.5 years. And I made so many mistakes, which is why it only lasted 3.5 years. But I learned so much for that. So like the main thing I try to do with any of the newsrooms I work with now is if I sort of see something that they're about to do, I'm like going, yeah, how about not that? Let me how about not that? But it's like, I'm glad you did that. And I'm wondering, you mentioned the thing about putting some of those things on a shelf. And I'll talk to this for all three of you, because this is a question I have, is like, what is something you thought was really gonna work that just didn't? And is it something that just wasn't ready for prime time, or would you go back to it, or is it something that you just now know is never gonna work again?
So I'll go back to kind of actually answers your first question a little bit too, which is we launched with this sort of plus concept, right? So it was like, I think the term at the time people used in other circles would have been called freemium model, right? So you got free stuff, you create members, and they get something behind this sort of walled garden. So that first tranche of people that sort of supported us, I think that was what we thought the pitch was. And in fact, a thing that drives me nuts is that at the time we priced it that way. We said, all right, well, it's a $7.50 a month membership. It was not a variable donation model. We just sort of said, you want to do this, well, here's the cost of that thing. About 60 or 70 people from that original group still pay $7.50 a month to this day, and that drives me crazy because I know that they would probably pay more. And I try to ask them to do it, and they sort of slowly come up. So one thing, I guess, a lesson learned there is just if you're going to implement a member model, don't fix yourself into one price. But the bigger story there, though, is the sort of the back end of that, giving people perks. And I think it's fine to think of perks as part of that relationship. I think it's a mistake to think of it as part of the transaction. People don't generally want the perk as the thing they're going to buy from you. You're the thing that they want to see, and we would poll it. I mean, we surveyed our audience about 2 years in, and I said, why do you give us money? And 90%, I'm not exaggerating, 90% said, just because we want to see you exist. Virtually none of them said it was because of the swag. So I think of the membership perk program as a better way of think of it more as more donor stewardship, a way to say thank you, not as a way to entice them into paying for you. So I say that I put it on the shelf because to some extent, I mean, there are best practices in membership development where you want to bring them into you. And we weren't ready for that. We didn't really have the staffing support or the time and the capacity to develop programming that would be beneficial to members, right? I mean, I've heard from folks today and some of the other panels, right, where they do beer nights with their readers and stuff, and that was challenging for us to do when you're working 80 hours a week just to get the newspaper out, right? So if you don't have time for that, I think that's okay, but for us, that's why it would still be on the shelf. It's something that we would go back to. I wouldn't rule out, in other words, the idea that you would create a robust set of perks around a membership program, but do think about it in terms of what you have the capacity to do.
Carolina, how about you? Anything?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake was not having started the membership program earlier. We launched it 8 years after launching, and it was, I mean, yeah, it is, yeah, for me, this is a very simple analogy, but for me, it's like shaking a palm tree, and you shake it and coconuts fall. And I think every time we shake the palm tree, we just see, I'm afraid at every campaign, before starting any campaign, I'm not sure if it's gonna happen. Data show us that people enthusiastically donate, and they want to be part of it, as you said. But so that was the biggest mistake. And one thing that I'm realizing is not so related to membership right now, but that I'm going back to when we launched Rambulante, we always wanted to be a nonprofit organization. We considered ourselves part of public media, but it seems that we did. But we have always been questioned about why you do it in Spanish, about Latin America, why, so we tried to find a lot of foundation support, and nobody gave us money. Just a few foundations support us now. So we were resilient and tried to find our own way to create a sustainable business model that doesn't we don't sell ads, but we also don't depend on foundation support. And now that the team is bigger and that we lost the co-producer of El Hilo, so we have like a little deficit. And I'm revising now, coming back to foundation, to find more foundation support and try to see if we can do more development, which as a nonprofit organization is hard, because you are like, nonprofits are supposed to be founded by foundations, but we are not, like we are too Latin American, too in the United States, too much in Spanish, we are not a perfect fit for anyone. So I'm trying to just pursue more development and fundraising from foundations.
Great. And Eric, how about you? Anything you've tried that?
Yes. Kind of touching on what Christian was getting into, something we've tried twice now in a couple different ways is a referral program. So, you go to, like, say, the Morning Brew is an example of, sign up get X number of friends to sign up for our newsletter, and, we'll send you a piece of swag. So kind of like at each tier, you could get potentially something else. So refer one person, we made like a digital calendar, refer 6 people, get a tote bag, that kind of thing. And we tried it twice now, and both times found a pretty lukewarm response. Like the last time we did it, I want to say we got maybe 300 email signups, which isn't nothing, but with all the effort that we put into it, could easily have been achieved through other means. And I think it kind of speaks to different audiences want different things. A Morning Brew audience might be more motivated to have a Morning Brew mug at the office. A Narwhal audience is there because they really are passionate about the work that we're doing and the impact that we're having. And for them, getting a piece of swag might be a nice piece of stewardship, but it's not a motivator. And so, yeah, wouldn't do that again.
But those handwritten notes have to be a motivator, right?
Oh,
From the founder's mom. I mean, come on.
Yes, absolutely.
Frame those. I love that. I love that concept. So one thing I'm curious about, because I know this is something that I think is sort of on the minds of a lot of who don't do newsrooms, who haven't done membership models yet, is not just like, will my readers pay, but will they support journalism? I think we sort of talk about this sort of fraught experience that journalists are in. I mean, Marion County, Kansas, if it can happen there, it can happen kind of anywhere, kind of approach. But are you finding that kind of reluctance? I mean, are people willing to part with their money? Your readers, I mean, just like, are they willing? And they're willing to support journalists and journalism, because I think that's what people want to know.
I live in.
And then also,
sorry.
the second two part of that is like, how do you find that out? And are you surveying your readers on a regular basis?
So, I mean, yes. The short answer is yes. I mean, the Current is operating in, I think, what would objectively be considered hostile territory for a lot of journalists. I mean, Lafayette Parish is one of the most politically conservative counties in America. So not that we have an activist or progressive bend, but the nature of the relationship between the right wing of American politics and journalism being what it is, it's not a fertile environment for us. And yet we do draw a fair amount of support from political conservatives and people who see tremendous value in the accountability work that we do around local government, and they miss this kind of work because it's not in their newspapers anymore. You know, I mean, if there's a problem that I see in that, frankly, I mean, to the reluctance, it's, you know, we seem to get a lot of support from folks who can support it. It gets more challenging after you get out of sort of like the typical news consumer. What was the second part of the question, Shay?
And the second part of this question, like, how do you sort of keep your pulse on that? Are you surveying your readers on a regular basis? And are you trying to find, this is the question I always have for news folks, is are you trying to figure out ways to get survey responses from people who don't read you? You know what I mean? Like, are you trying to like to really get to get a holistic snapshot of your community as opposed to just like your reader snapshot, which is going to be different. I think you touched upon that.
Yeah.
A lot of your donors are going to be people who can give, and they might be of a different political persuasion than say like your broader community.
Sure. I mean, I think that's something we've done, frankly, and I don't mean journalism in general. I mean, The Current has done a poor job of, is really market research. So I don't have a strong answer to that question, right? Which is that like, we haven't really surveyed outside of our immediate circles. I mean, I have an idea of what the perception is. Beyond that, though, I mean, how I track enthusiasm is measuring campaigns year over year, right? Looking at our audience growth. Is our audience growing? And is our conversion of that audience into paying members keeping pace with that growth? And so if you start to see a plateau, then you can sort of ask a couple of different questions. Is it a problem with how I'm propositioning it? Is it a problem with the work that we're doing? Are we reaching enough people? And those are questions, frankly, I'm asking right now. I mean, I ask them all the time. And, you know, I think we do well, The Current, to do better market research, frankly.
And Caroline, how about you?
Yes, absolutely. They want to, our donors, like people who support us, they want to support the journalism that we do. It's very unique still. They mentioned that. We ask people when they donate, the reason why they donate. And we have the dashboard, like wherever like they donate on Stripe is synced on my Slack. So it's very reassuring to have like all this. Slack is a chat for business if you don't use it like a WhatsApp for business. And then I see every donation that comes every time with the name, like the name, email, and the reason why they donate. And that helps me to keep working because sometimes it's overwhelming. So we see a lot of them every day. And they do that, but they said that it's because of that, but also we ask them to donate to make sure that we can keep the lights on, that this is like also like we don't have to put the content behind a paywall. So if you donate, you are able to help other people to get this content that they consider that is important. I guess they believe in democracy and the need of information and all that. So that's one thing. Like for the community, what we do is that we have this content, is like an agreement, like a tacit agreement with our community, with the audience, that we all play a role on this community so it can like stay with us forever. We do our work, we report, do diligent and rigorous journalism, and make sure that the next episode is better than the last one. That's our commitment and our promise. And people who can support us, they support us with a donation. And this is like kind of like an ecosystem for us, for all to preserve this, because it's not easy. So it's kind of like, it transcends a bit of the journalism. It's just, let's keep this journalism alive.
And Eric, I'm assuming for what you do, since it's not sort of like local news, and it's like you've got, you know, pretty much all of Canada as your local news. Do you find though that in Canada is any different? I mean, I know right now with you know, I mean, with Facebook and Google sort of like restricting what people can read from outlets, but are you still finding that translating into like, are people still, they want to support good journalism?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of context to what Shay just mentioned is Canada passed this legislation called Bill C-18, and it's about regulating tech companies so that they pay a portion of their revenue to support journalism. And Facebook, or Meta, the parent company, has responded by saying we disagree with this legislation, and as a result, in order the regulations, which aren't fully in effect, say that they're going to have to essentially pay because they're profiting off of news content because people are sharing it and engaging on their platforms by sharing news. And so Meta's saying we're not going to comply with this, and so therefore we're going to block access to all news for all users in Canada. So that applies to both Facebook and Instagram. So as of like August, we essentially don't post anymore to those platforms. I suppose we could still post because it would reach everybody in this room being in the US, but all other news, like if you're in Canada, you don't have access to that. And Google is currently threatening to do the same, although we shall see. There's a lot of back and forth and negotiations happening behind the scenes. So as this kind of unfolded and it was kind of developing in late June, early July, I believe is when the legislation passed. And so our response to that was, we could take the view of like panic and kind of stoking the negativity around that. Instead, our approach has been to turn to our audience and try and get more people into the fold and increase our direct relationships with our readers. And newsletter is a huge piece of that. Everybody's kind of been evangelizing newsletters, and I'm here to agree. And so what we implemented was our most aggressive pop-up ever on our website, which is like a full screen pop-up that has this like fading like GIF that says "Good news is hard to find." That kind of disappears, and it mentions the actions that Google and Meta are planning or have already taken, and asks people to sign up for our newsletter so they still stay in the loop. And there's no X button, controversially. So it kind of looks like a registration gate, even though you could just say I'm already signed up. And the result has been a 250% increase in conversion rate for us on our email pop-ups. And we've had some of our best months yet in terms of growing that email list. And we're already seeing the results of those people, some of those people converting over to membership. We've already had, I believe, around 180 people who have signed up in those few months from that pop-up who have already started making recurring donations.
Great, and I think each of you touched upon this a little bit, but just to sort of clarify, so as you look at your sort of revenue stream, like the sort of the pie charts, how much do you want your membership to be, say, in like 3 to 5 years? And do you want, is that coming at the loss of something else? Like, is it access to foundation funding? Is it access to ad revenue because of economy? I mean, like, but how do you see the shift happening? And are you gonna see a time where you're gonna need to rely more on membership than the mix is right now, than what you're doing? And I mean, I know we heard some great stuff this morning from like, and I think like I'm gonna go back to API and talk to our program team about like maybe doing like a short sprint on niche publications for places, because I think it's something that we don't think about a lot, but I think just sort of hearing about the successes this morning, I thought was really encouraging. That's actually workable and doable and can build in. But I'm curious just in terms of like this membership models, like how do you see this? Is it a bigger part of your pie going forward?
Yeah. Now it represents, the membership program represents 20% of our annual budget. It's the second largest source of income. I hope that I can duplicate that in the next year. I mean, like we have 5,000 donors now, members now, and I would like to duplicate it. I'm not sure if that's possible. That was not a goal before, but El Hilo was co-produced by Vice Media, and they used to pay half of the budget, annual budget, and they went bankruptcy. We finished our contract with them the week before, and now like that money is not there anymore. And the membership program now actually brings $350,000 every year. So I hoped, and that's basically what Vice was bringing to, is kind of like just by chance. So the thing with the membership program is that it's easier to convert a donor, even if for a $2 donation, than talking to a foundation, finding a partnership, or like developing a product. I'm very enthusiastic about products. As this morning I asked that question, I was like, wow, this is amazing, I can do that. But it's just so painful, and the capacity is tight. So I think the community, they're just so generous. I just like really appreciate how people are so much, because they just support us, and that's why I think we should rely more on them.
That's actually a really well-timed question, because we're kind of going through a revenue growth plan right now and trying to ask that question. What is the best way to align our revenue mix going forward. I mean, on the spot, from some personal experience, it would be my goal to have it be as high as it possibly can be. I know that seems like an obvious thing to say, but it's the most resilient form of revenue that we've got, right? So right now it's about 30% of our revenue mix. If you add in, we'll call them major donors, and again, I'll say that I benchmarked that at $1,000. That's an insulated group of people. So the more of them that you have, if one of them gets pissed off, then you don't, lose your rent for the month. I mean, we had a situation where a major funder, somebody who had given us about $50,000, was not happy with our coverage of local government, and he said no. So we lost $50,000, just like that. So that's terrifying, right? We withstood it because we had a membership program. And so, I mean, for me, it's like if I'm moving forward, I'm thinking, okay, well, we should get to 50%. Could we get it to 60%? And the variable in there that I don't have a good answer for is what our actual ceiling is in our community. Is it 1,000 monthly members? Is it 2,000 monthly members? I don't know yet, and some of that is because of, do we deliver a product that scales that well in Lafayette, right? So, I mean, that's our hope, but I would sort of answer it a little differently and say, whether we're talking about membership or individual donor cultivation, I would say I would love those two components to be the largest revenue pieces for us.
Great. How about you, Captain Narwhal?
Yeah, so right now I would say close to 40% of our revenue comes from our readers, and that's like our single largest source of revenue are our readers. I guess it was, we've had many years of strong growth. I think a lot of publishers also saw, like early in the pandemic, a lot of people were online and reading and supporting, and that was also the time when we were participating in the accelerator and kind of catching some of that low-hanging fruit with more calls to action to join. And then sometime last year, we kind of got to the point where we were realizing that the membership targets we had set for that fiscal year, weren't going to come to fruition. And so luckily we have a pretty nimble team and working with our finance director. And so we adjusted those targets to something that was a little bit more conservative. And we're just coming up on the end of our fiscal, so we're about to start our next one in October. And we've kind of continued with setting a little bit more conservative targets for what we want to reach on an individual reader growth point, even though I guess we have already surpassed what our targets were for this year. All that being said, especially with question marks for us around platform reach with that legislation, and just general economic headwinds, and people maybe feeling a little bit more uncomfortable about spending that income towards supporting journalism. We're just thinking long and hard about how we can make sure we're finding readers where they are, keeping those sources of reach and revenue as diverse as possible, and not being too reliant on any one place. Because as Christian said, like you could lose a piece of like funding, whether that's like a major donor or grant support, and so kind of having as many buffers as you can.
Great. All right. Well, I know I don't want to run out of time before we open it up to you all for questions. So if any of you have questions for the panel, now's the time.
My name's Luella Brin. I run a nonprofit newsroom in Montana on an Indian reservation. And we have about a 35% poverty rate in our community that we cover. So I was wondering what the profile is in your communities, because there's no way I can expect even 10% of my membership revenue to come from membership with a poverty rate that high. So kind of what is the profile of your communities in regards to poverty rates and unemployment rates?
So Lafayette, that's a really important point. And I've been, I should say, in cohorts with organizations that have demographic makeup similar to yours that operate membership programs. So if you're not, I'd recommend connecting with like INN if you're not, or Lion, or those kinds of organizations. But to answer your question directly, Lafayette's fairly affluent. And most of the people that pay money look like traditional news consumers, which means older, whiter, richer, right? That tends to be what it is. On the other hand, we do get a lot of donations from folks that are $5 in a year or $10 a year and 20. That stuff adds up. So I mean, I think it comes down to how you broach it. I don't think it's inappropriate to ask. I think it should measure your expectation on maybe what you get back. And my perception is that does work for other publishers that have been in similar environments. I mean, our monthly average revenue take is $12 a month, right? If I just kind of look at it from that perspective, I mean, I was listening to Lindsay talk, and she said, we doubled our newspaper to, what was it, to $140, right? So $12 a month, it's, roughly the cost of your subscription rate, right? And just sort of penciled out that way. I bring that up only to say that, like, I'm sure even people who are in that sort of elements of your poverty can't afford $140 a year. But if that's sort of a larger indication of the overall wealth in your community, I would imagine some portion can afford, say, $140 a year, $12 a month, right? And you can build a strong revenue program, with figures that are kind of individual figures that are that small, I guess is my point. Does that help?
Yeah, I had that fear before launching our program. We serve like Latinos in the US and Latinos in Latin America, and I thought that our community couldn't, like our listeners couldn't afford this, right? And $350,000 is a lot of money. And when we started asking, we realized that some people can pay, they are happy to support us. We have I know that the unemployment rate on our community through our surveys that are really just 6,000 people, but we have 100,000 listeners. So are 20%, but some other people, they have a PhD, So I don't know exactly how divide this, but some people, what we did is that we asked people who can support us to support us. And we explain why. And some other people are not even Latinos, but it's of their interest that our communities are well informed. I don't think, for us, the membership program makes sense because it helps us also to validate the content that we do every month. And it's important to see people only give you money because they respect your work. And that's important to us. If they will never give us money, their money. I mean, we all need the money. There is an inflation, people are losing their jobs. So I think it's also maybe even if it's not about the amount of members that you have, even if it's just having a few, the loyalty and the connection that it creates with even a few donors or people who support us, even with a few donations is very important. I think we see it as some people who will be there always backing you, and not only money-wise. So I will encourage you to explore if that's possible in your community. Ask them. Some people, we don't want anyone to feel alienated. So when people respond, hey, you ask for money and I don't have any money and please stop asking, we tell them, there are other ways to help. Why don't you just tell other people about us or just give us feedback about what we do? And I think if you just balance the message, you can get a lot of support.
Yeah, I would echo what both Carolina and Christian said, and just creating opportunities for engagement. So you're right, some people might not have the means to give anything, and telling them, one way you can support us is by telling your friends about us and sharing our stories on social media, and just helping to build your audience, because maybe a friend that they tell you about does have the means to support you. And also one thing we always emphasize in all of our appeal messaging is can you sign up for any amount that you can afford, whatever is comfortable within your means, and having the option for people to fill in however much that they feel like they can give. And if somebody comes back and says, please don't ask me, I don't have the means, we can also put them on a list of don't solicit these people. We don't have to keep hitting them up and annoying them or trying to create a sense of guilt, because that's obviously not our intention.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I worked for a grassroots community organization for a while in Vermont and New Hampshire. And a lot of the ways we were obviously organizing around issues that were those who were most impacted by it were probably the least able to sort of support a campaign. And so what we would do is we'd work for non-monetary ways in which people could potentially contribute if they could. Even at that point, back then, I mean, when Facebook and Twitter, or whatever it's called now, X, you know, we're still a thing where like it would be helpful to have your message amplified there, wherever that might else be, to have them do that. Because I feel like that is, it's also sort of understanding too, like it's also gives an opportunity to kind of build a community around there, even if it's not necessarily monetary focused to start. And I feel like that's something that, you know, can kind of help to lead to that eventually. And you sort of, and I agree with Carolina, like setting your expectations sort of small and not have it too big and not worry about it too much, because the folks who are interested will help you, and it might be it's only like $5 a year, right? And that's,
I want to add that if you're, I don't know how big your team is, when you have a smaller team, I want to encourage everyone to like create that relationship with the community, because it's so hard when you're like 2 people, 5 people. I start like 2, we are 35. And then like you don't know, when you are 5 people, you're just working and trying to do so many things that you can't really like take care of the community, I mean the interaction so much. And it's so nice to have a relationship, because it means it helps us also like with the burnt out. So I think it's a good, creating that conversation with the community is important.
Hi, Duck Liu with Knight Foundation. Thank you for this really inspiring thinking about how you developed your organizations. For the other publishers, could you talked some about the processes and the mindsets that you have in terms of growing audience revenues? I'd be really curious about some of the tools, conferences, products, things like that you found really indispensable for your work. I think you've mentioned being a part of Lion, INN. I've heard News Revenue Hub. I've heard Newsmatch. What are the other things for all of you that you found like this is something I really need and has helped contribute to my success?
Man, there's a lot to name there, honestly, and we've gone through some things recently that have been frankly transformative. I mean, so through Lion, particularly, and if you guys aren't familiar with, that's local independent online news. So it's an organization that represents primarily small local outlets that are, you know, predominantly online. You can have a print product and be part of Lion, but the key is that you're online kind of most. And Lion does a lot of great professional development programs that are around things that are really hard to think about if you don't have a background on the business side of the news, which I did not. I mean, the tail end of what I was working for at the Alt Weekly, I mean, I was still kind of in that separation of church and state space. So as on the editorial side, I had very little view to how news organizations were run. So, you know, working with Lion, for instance, we went through a program that was about building and managing a team, right? Which doesn't sound like a news-related program, but it was something that's sort of like, if you're going to scale at some point, you need to have a staffing plan. You need to have HR policies. You need to have, you know, how do you settle, you know, how do you develop an organizational hierarchy, right? Like, you know, these are questions you may not answer for yourself if you start a publication or if you run one and you're the editor, right? And you've never been the publisher. And, you know, those programs are really great. They connect you with a lot of really interesting people. Like our coach for that was Dick Toffel from ProPublica. Which was really interesting. And, you know, Dick's insight there has shaped how we've approached revenue. For instance, you know, I got to ask Dick, like, how does ProPublica raise money? And he was like, don't go after foundations, go after rich people.
Get an endowment.
Yeah, I'm sure, well, there are other ways that they can get money. But larger point is like, I find those professional type opportunities, now it's not even just the stature of the person that you get to connect with, so much as like the opportunity to talk about the sides of your business that may not always be immediately apparent to you and painful, but you feel the pain around it, right? Like it's something that's gonna get in the way of your growth and your sustainability, even if it comes at a high expense, frankly. You know, like going through that, getting it all, we got audited by Lion. We looked at our revenue, and I remember I was real pissed at them because they gave me like a sheet back. And the sheet was like, you need a business partner. And I was like, that's not advice. You know, like, you know, so, but they were right. And so I found a way, you know, forward, and I got a contractor to do kind of like operations as an operations consultant. And she's actually hired her as a business. She's our general manager now. But like, I don't think I would have gotten there without that kind of work, if that's, so hopefully that's helpful. It kind of gives you a good idea of what we've been through.
Yeah, I think for us and for me particularly, it was paying for business advice, and that came I'm part of INN, I'm part of Newsmatch. I had a fellowship, a journalism fellowship long time ago. But it was at some point we were talking to NPR. NPR came to us 2015, and they came with this like proposal to have us like join in NPR. And at the same time, we had this offer of a company who wanted to buy Radio Ambulante. And we were fiscally sponsored, and we were like trying to see if we will become our own entity or not, but it was very tempting to go the route of selling, but we didn't like the company. There was a lot of money, but it was complicated. It was like it's such like a decision that was like bigger than everyone, right? And we had an audience already and a product, so I started getting that business advice, and how it helped is that it allowed me to understand things that I couldn't understand at the time and take my own decisions, following my instincts and trying to figure it out, to solve a riddle. So I work with Public Media Company. They are a nonprofit organization, and they advise radio stations, and they're great. And they still are our business advisors. I spoke to some people who used to do conversions from nonprofit to for-profits, to Media Development Investment Bank, and some other people who I knew. And that was very useful at the time, and I managed to negotiate a good contract with NPR and stayed in public media, and I'm glad that we did. It was the best that happened. I just sometimes feel that when you are a small team, it's not that some people say, oh, I applied to fellowships, and fellowships are for like 20 people per year, no? So I really believe that talking to other leaders, other business leaders, even if they are not in your industry, is very important to understand and to learn how they do it, and mostly like the personal toll that it takes. I was married to a co-founder. My co-founder is my husband. We, like when we wanted to have the second baby, he applied to a fellowship at Berkeley, and a fellowship for 3 people. He got it, and with that health insurance, we were able to have a baby. Like these kind of things. That is the reality of journalism, and I'm glad that everything worked on the same year, But I just feel that the personal toll, we are so invested on creating these media outlets, and that's the reason why I think we should be able to get legal advice, business advice, and all that. I know that these organizations give that advice, but I hope that it will be easier to get it more personalized. So I went to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I joined the Narwhal when it was doing the Facebook membership accelerator, and that was like a huge crash course for me, and like learning what like an audience funnel was. I was like, I don't know it, and that hugely informs. It's a huge part of our thinking now. Now Facebook doesn't have that journalism program anymore, but I mean, some of the people that were involved with that are doing. Blue Engine is like a consulting firm that's doing a lot of work. We work with News Revenue Hub to support us with our donation pages and that kind of like tech stack operations side. The Membership Puzzle Project, like Carolina said, like talking to people and learning people that aren't necessarily just in journalism, like the nonprofit world is big. Our founder comes from both a journalism and environmental nonprofit background, as was like our finance director. And so, they brought some of that knowledge around how to fundraise effectively to a journalism side. So I would just say like talk to as many people as you can.
Yeah, I'll continue to echo Lion Publishers as one good organization to be thinking about and looking into more. I had the great fortune of consulting with them when Chris Cruson came on as the AD for the first 6 months, kind of helping them clean up and then reorganize their membership structure and how they sort of look at like becoming and growing their membership. But it was just so I got to go and interview a whole bunch of like publishers who were part of Lion, which really was fascinating to kind of hear their stories. But they're doing really good sort of like nuts and bolts toolkit workshops that I think are really helpful. ONA, which is also really good. The ONA conference, which was in Philly this year, was awesome. The one in LA was great last year. I mean, their online summit is like coincides with Radically Rural. So some folks who might not be here might be there or like at their desk there. They have a lot of good hands-on trainings, and it runs the gamut too. It's not just for reporters. It's also sort of business side. the one in Philly, I mean, the two big tracks were really AI and then newsletters. Because that's where, I mean, newsletters is where sort of, that's where people are now, and that's where you're gonna find people with the implosion of social media platforms in terms of audience growth, especially in audience engagement, especially for news organizations. They pretty much disavowed, like, news is just not a thing apparently on social media, according to the platforms. That's newsletters is where we're sort of having that one direct sort of connection in people's inboxes or in their digital space. And sort of that was a big track on like, how do you do that and where are all the tools? So I would say that membership puzzle project, I mean, it lives in perpetuity online for as long as I think it'll stay up there. There's a lot of great resources and stories of like what newsrooms have actually done and did. So there's like case studies in there. And since I work at the American Press Institute, I can't stress enough, like, follow us. We actually are on all the social medias. But also, if you're not signed up for our Need to Know newsletter, which is a 5-day-a-week industry-wide newsletter, where we put out opportunities for grants that we often issue. In fact, we just closed on we funded like 17 newsrooms to fund them on civic discourse, like grants to create like civic discourse in their communities and sort of what that imagine. And they had to come to us with a project. But we do this every like twice a year. We come out with like $25,000 to $50,000 worth of money that will spread out throughout newsrooms to kind of help them with an individual project. We also do a lot of trainings. I work on the product strategy team, and we do trainings both for the newsrooms that we work with that use our products, but increasingly this past year, we did trainings outside of that. In fact, the first one we did earlier in the year, I led a training on how to engage readers offline, which is something that I think a lot of community journalists know how to do, but not everybody does. And even then, there's still good ideas on how to do that. We did another one on newsletters, and we did another one on training on transitioning to GA4, which was a big pain in the ass for a lot of folks this year.
Still is.
And right, and exactly, and still is, as we're finding out. So I would say all those things, but American Press Institute, if you go and sign up for our newsletter, it's 5 days a week. It's a digest email every day, and it provides. And we also hold mini summits. And we're increasingly do that. That's something API was known for decades, which was hosting sort of summits that brought to people, not just journalists but non-journalists. In fact, we're doing one in Atlanta in October on, as Caroline sort of was just touching upon, mental health in journalism, and sort of really focusing on that. The applications to attend, I think, have closed, but we're doing these kinds of things. Next year we'll be doing some on the election and covering elections in your community. So we're going to be doing some summits on that as well. So, you know, we're not a membership organization. We're an individual nonprofit. We're a journalism sort of support organization / think tank. So we try to do a lot of research and do a lot of case studies, and we operate and use those case studies from the newsrooms we work with on how they're sort of applying journalism in their community. So, anyway. And radically rural, I mean, you know.
Yeah, this is amazing.
So, thanks to this great panel for their insights and their experience. A lot of interesting learnings have gone on with these folks. They've in many cases started from the ground up and have had some great success. So thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Shay, for leading the panel, and Eric as well for your contributions. And also my thanks to the Knight Foundation. Duck Lou is with us. We're delighted. He's just a little bit more about Knight and its relationship with this organization. As I mentioned this morning, they've given us a grant, Radically Rural grant, to underwrite the attendance this year of 13 rural journalists. And we've got 2 more years of funding for that, so we'll be able to continue to reach far and wide to bring folks to Keene for this event. So we're deeply appreciative. And of course, the Marlin Fitzwater Center for Communication and Franklin Pierce University for sponsoring this track. Just a few announcements about tomorrow and this evening. Regarding tomorrow, for anyone that's really interested in getting up early like me, there'll be a run and a walk from Ted's Shoe and Sport for anyone that's looking to get some, get up early and exercise. Ted's Shoe is just south of the Colonial on Main Street, and I know some folks want to do that, so if you're interested, that's great. The run is going to go past the Wall Dog Mural Project, which is, Keene was fortunate a few years ago to get the Wall Dogs in here, and they're artists, they're mural artists, and they painted the sides of 16 buildings with beautiful murals that depict Keene's history. So it's kind of a jaunt through Keene's past, and I'll be leading the walkers in a little neighborhood and a trail walk if you're interested. That's at 7 o'clock tomorrow. At 9 o'clock tomorrow, the full summit reopens back at the Colonial. We are all back here at 11, and for Jack's program, he's assembled some journalists that are talking about great feats of journalism at rural newspapers and their experiences in producing some really groundbreaking and impactful journalism. So I'm looking forward to that. And from here today, the Sentinel's holding a mixer for all of you folks. So please stop by our office. If you go out the door and take a left and you go straight, we are on the left on West Street. We're literally a couple of blocks walk from here. You're gonna have to cross one road, and we're wedged between two churches. Tom Ewing describes our building as the world's biggest chia pet because it's ivy covered, and you shouldn't have any trouble picking it out. But please join us for, a beverage and some more conversation.
What time is that?
That is at 4 o'clock. So right after this, we'll just head up there. But arrive anytime between 4 and 5, and that'd be great. From there, there'll be a bus that will take those of you that want to attend the Connect event, which I highly recommend. It's going to be at Stonewall Farm, which is a farm in Keene. Great music, great food, lots more conversation. A lot of things are planned for that. That kicks off around 5:30. I think the bus will leave the Sentinel between 5:15 and 5:30. And please check out the website for other activities in the morning for those of you that are with us tomorrow. I just want to say how appreciative I am for all of your attendance, for the questions that you've asked today, and for really kind of fulfilling what's been a pretty full first day. So thank you very much, and hope to see you at the Sentinel in a few minutes.
Thank you.